Thanks for joining. We are going to go ahead and get started right away. So,
Hey, Freddie.
Hello, how you doing, Tim?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Nancy Creed is the executive director that we're losing from the Springfield Chamber of Commerce. She's amazing. Thank you for joining us again, Nancy. Freddie Lopez is our finance person from the community with Home Logic and his other backgrounds. He is a wonderful addition to the committee. And then we have Richard Johnson from our neighborhoods council here who's also on our tax rate setting committee. And we have Tim Allen, who is part of the finance team, the finance subcommittee for the city council, Councilor Hurst and Councilor Letterman. So thank you all for joining us today. And we will let the folks sitting with TJ and Patrick introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
TJ, oh, sorry. Like we haven't done this before. TJ, Financial Officer, City of Springfield.
Patrick Greenhall, Chairman of the Board of Assessors.
Christopher Caputo, Collector Treasurer.
Melanie Akobe, Budget Director.
Pat Burns, Comptroller.
Lindsay Hackett, Deputy CAFA. Jessica Guerra, Board of Assessors.
And Matthew Fontaine, Board of Assessors.
Thank you very much. And Paul Tuthill is with us. He's a reporter. Thank you, Paul, for coming to this meeting and the last. And so we will go ahead and get started. Are we going to go over the PowerPoint all over again? Is there anyone here that didn't attend the last meeting?
I didn't attend it. I wasn't
Okay.
able to, but I did talk with Patrick on the phone yesterday for a while, so.
Okay. We could briefly just run through it, Patrick, just for Councilor Allen's benefit and anyone who's going to watch a recording later.
Sure. So go ahead and share the screen here.
Oh, let me see if you, let me do that. Share it. Okay, should be good.
Okay, so we are here to talk about the fiscal 22 residential tax factor. And this, in order to get there, the first thing that we have to do is define what the full and fair cash value is of all of the properties in the city of Springfield. That as of date is January 1st of 2021. We also use the physical status date is as of June 30th of 2021. So we basically take what is there as of June 30th on 2021 and move it to the January 1st date to come up with values for all of the properties in Springfield. Single family homes are our largest class, and we value those by looking at a market sales comparison approach. Commercial industrial properties, we use an income approach. We also use that for apartments. You can go to the next slide. So this is a slide that's just showing our total taxable value from fiscal 20 to fiscal 22. You'll see the residential value is 7.5 billion. The CIP value is 2.2 billion for a total of 9.9 billion for fiscal 22. This is a slide that's showing that we are moving away from our levy ceiling. The levy ceiling has been a major impediment for the city of Springfield to raise revenue. And it's a hard cap on the amount that the city can raise. And essentially it's 2.5% of your total values. So when the market is declining, as you can see in 18 and 19, we were up against the levy ceiling. We are moving away from that. That's really good news for the city of Springfield as a whole, which means that property values are rising. So equity in the home, that's a really good news story for us. This is showing the percent of the levy versus the percent of the value that we utilized for fiscal 21. So this is just kind of representing what the shift is from the residential to the commercial. So the total share of the value for residential was 74.38% last year, but they paid 58.33% of the levy. And conversely, the commercial, they represented 25.62% of the total value, but yet represented 41.69% of the total tax for the levy. This is a slide someone asked last week is sort of what is happening with the average commercial property in Springfield. So that top chart is showing the fiscal 21 versus fiscal 22. I would like to point out that this does exclude any kind of vacant land or new personal property accounts. If you remove those two, the average increase for commercial, industrial, and personal is $222.41. I would caution you, this is a kind of a tough number because each commercial property is so different. It's not as uniform as looking at the residential sort of average. But you requested the number, so we were able to provide that here. The below chart is showing the SIP shift, the commercial, industrial, personal property shift since fiscal 12. And you'll see that kind of even the proposed rate in 20, 21, and 22, that's going higher. And what that means is the commercial properties are taking more of the levy than what their value is. So they're taking more of the tax burden.
Before you leave this screen, can you go back, please?
Scroll up here. Okay.
So the change is $5,697 total or per property, like, because I don't see how $697 could be an average increase of a bill of $222. The change is small, but the average bill increased by 222. That's
Yeah.
confusing to me.
I'll just double check that real quick.
So, yeah, 5,600 times 39.4 is 224. So essentially what we're looking at here is, again, like Patrick stated, all of the commercial, industrial, and personal property accounts without vacant land, without new properties. We get 4,500 parcels. Last year's average value of all these parcels was 500,000, 501,000. This year's average value is 507. The difference, the 5,600, I believe if you divide that by 1,000 times 3904, you get the 222.
Let me try it. You said divide the 5,697 by 1,000
Yes,
and then multiply it by the 3904.
right.
That's what I got. It just seems like the change is so small for an average bill increase of 224.41. That still doesn't like, because even if, I don't know, but we can move on. I'll talk to Patrick about that after. It just seems like the average change is 5,000 and the bill increase is like 224. That, I don't know, that doesn't make sense to me. Freddie?
This is the same way, I'm going to cut you off. This is just the same way that we look at the average single family bill difference. So it's looking at it the same way, comparing apples to apples that way. But certainly we're open to questions on that.
You're muted, Freddie.
Okay, I think on the working as a commercial real estate broker, I don't know how you can actually come to an average like you can on the residential for the commercial properties, because we're talking about some of them are single buildings with one storefront versus, let's say, a 16-foot commercial office building. So when you're talking about the averages, it's kind of hard to really come up with an average. And because let's say like a Smith & Wesson, you're not going to compare it to I don't know, a mom and pop auto body shop, let's say. It's kind of like, so it's such a vast, the property types are so vast that I mean, the average is, even though it is an average because you're taking all the numbers and combining them together, but it's not like a realistic, kind of like on the residential. We know the average residential is what, 190, almost $200,000 for a property. And that's real. You're not going to get a house in Springfield more. I mean, you guys could tell me more, but let's say top is probably like 400, 450, maybe. I could be wrong, but it's not that wide, as in you're going to get a multi-million-dollar commercial property versus a commercial property for $150,000. Just the range is wide. That's why, so it's, I mean, even though it's information, it doesn't paint the same picture as the residential average. Am I correct in assuming that?
I agree with that 100%. We typically don't use an average for commercial properties. I'm not really sure it's ever been presented this way before, but it was asked of me at our last meeting, so I at least wanted to provide the information. But I do agree with you. It's not a really kind of a useful tool as it is kind of on the residential side.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Freddie, because I couldn't wrap my mind around it, so
Yep.
I appreciate that explanation.
No problem.
The next slide here will show the single family, but.
Right, so this is just, yeah, the 10-year average value all the way to the left. You'll see the average tax bill in there, the change, and then the percent change. So you'll see the average values. We're stagnant in some of those years. In the last few years, as we all know, the market is so strong, they are going up.
And Councilor Whitfield, if we take this difference here between 20 and 21 and multiply it by the rate, that's the difference you're seeing here. The commercial one was computed the same way as you're seeing this cell here computed for the change.
So this was a conversation that we had a little bit, but I think it's a little clearer here. This is about the $5 million of free cash commitment that we're using this year. So $2.5 million would be used for fiscal 22. $2.5 million would be set aside for a reduction in tax rates in fiscal 23. This actually would result in approximately a 22% reduction in what the tax increase would have been for this year for fiscal 22.
Okay, can you go back? Because I think Councilor Hurst had a question, and I also wanted to see if the conversation to use 10 million, 5 and 5 each year happens, or any other amount to increase the amount used to lower the property.
I would just, if we could get through this presentation
Okay.
first,
Okay.
and then if you can get to that. I do see Councilor Hurst has a question
Yeah.
also related to the previous slide.
So we went up roughly $500, maybe a little bit more on average over the course of the last 5 years for on the residential side. Is that accurate? Am I seeing that?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's $23 average increase last year, $165 in fiscal 20, $81, and you can go up better.
Got it.
So
And,
618.
okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm sure I'll have more. Got
Sure.
it. 6.8. The average is roughly 618, 600 over the last 5 years. That's a lot. That's a lot on average. Got it. Thank you.
Welcome. Next slide. This is showing the tax levy history and facts from 2018. We did just sort of plug in the information since our last meeting with the proposed rates. So the single rate would be $23.74. The proposed residential rate is $18.82. The CIP rate would be $39.04. That would result in a reduction in the gap, but it does still put more of the burden on the commercial property at 1.6444. The average single family value is 185,100, and that would result in a average single tax of 3,484.
Patrick, is that other screen in the slide that shows the highlighted yellow and all that?
We have that's not on this slide, but we'll certainly talk. We're not on the PowerPoint, but we'll
Okay.
talk about that shortly. Yes.
Okay. All right.
And this is just a slide indicating the council votes that are needed. The adoption of the residential factor should be on or before December 1st. This date is required in order for us to timely generate third quarter tax bills. And because the Department of Revenue needs to certify our tax factor and tax rates as well. So before we can issue tax bills, and frankly, before we can even really start the billing process, we need approval from the Department of Revenue. So we can go back to the options table. So we can stop share. Let me double check. Okay, so this was the option table that we had on the screen and has since been emailed to everyone as well.
Does anybody need an explanation on the table or are we good? Because I have a question on it.
I can just briefly mention that the yellow highlights are from last year's information. So the tax rates, the SIP shift, the commercial rate and the gap. What's highlighted in orange is the recommendation from the mayor and us in the administration.
So I'm a little bit confused about the CIP shift because if I look at the 1890, it gives a CIP shift of 16338. And then if I look at the 3923, it gives a CIP shift of 16536 is what I see with my eyes. Could be off, but so I don't understand how we get the 16276 all the way up there as if the tax rate was set at 1895 and 3864.
So the SIP shift, maybe we do want to, I did a little glossary. So you can do stop share.
Patrick, have you sent this to us besides showing it to us now?
Yes. City Council office sent it out this morning, I think.
Okay,
So that's the calculation that goes into the SIP shift. It's a metric that is used to show the additional levy shifted to the CIP properties from the residential properties. And what it's looking at is the CIP shifted levy percent divided by the full and fair cash value percent of the CIP. So looking at example for this year, the CIP shifted levy under the proposed rates would be 40.0247, while the full and fair cash value of the CIP percent would be 24.3405. So the calculation is there.
The full and fair cash value of
The total property value for commercial, industrial, and residential. So what we're doing is we're saying, what is the total value? And then we need to obviously fund the levy. So what we're doing is we're shifting more of the levy, the percent of the levy, onto the commercial, industrial, and personal property. If you kind of scroll up, you'll see if you just do a single tax rate, so in the city of Springfield, let me scroll a little more. So the total value is 9.9 billion, and in that would be residential and commercial. So if we just said, here's the levy versus the total value, our single tax rate in the city of Springfield would be $23.74 for residential and commercial. But we shift some of the tax burden onto commercial.
So can you scroll back down a little bit?
I did not send out this glossary. I just kind of did it this afternoon, so.
Can you just explain the 24.34 for me one more time? I'm sorry.
So the 24.3405 is the amount of the total value that is represented in the commercial industrial property. So if you scroll up to the top in that green, you'll see the 24.34. That represents the total values in Springfield. So 7.5 billion for residential and 2.4 billion for commercial. As a percent, it's 75.66 and 24.34.
Okay, because more of what I looked at is that the burden reduced from FY21 till now, although the CIP shift may have increased slightly, the percentage of the shift decreased by over 1%.
So we're capped. So what Department of Revenue looks at is this SIP shift. And there is a maximum that we can put on to the commercial, industrial, and personal property. And in the city of Springfield, it would be 1.75. I would point out that that's well over a $40 tax rate. So those options aren't included on this sheet. I certainly can add them, but I don't think it would make sense to even kind of show that. But as Department of Revenue is tracking the SIP shift from last year to this year under the proposed rates, the shift does go up. So we're still putting more of the burden on the commercial. I think what's a little different this year is the residential market is rising at such a rate. The commercial market is relatively stagnant as a whole. So I think maybe what you're looking at is might be a little confusing because of that. So
Yeah,
for-
because to me, I'm looking at the levy percent and the residential percent. I think last year it was like 41 something. Oh, right here, 4169. If you look up at the top,
Right.
the percentage, and now it's 40.02. Nancy, you have your hand raised?
No, that was me just trying to squint at the screen.
Oh, okay, because your hand raise sign is up, so I didn't know if you wanted to say something.
Sorry about that.
But Councilor Whitfield, I do see what you're talking about. However, because the percent increase, if you look at the very top, kind of the CIP value goes from 2.417 billion over to 2.433. So the percent of the full and fair cash value of commercial has also come down. So that's putting the extra stress on the shift. If the commercial values were coming up, this would be a very different picture.
What do you mean it came down? It looked like it increased from 2.2417 to 2.433.
The total value increased, but the total as a percent of all of the values decreased. It was 25.62 last year as a total value. This year, commercial, industrial, and personal represents 24.34% of the total value.
Maybe because some stores went out of business or businesses went out of business or something.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's some markets that are facing some difficulties post-COVID, certainly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that I just didn't understand how we got to that CIP shift of 16276 last year. Okay, any questions from counselors or the committee? Oh, hi, Councilor Davila. I didn't see you.
Hello, Madam Chair. Good evening. Madam Chair, if I may, just a clarifying question. The tax rate committee, they have not made the recommendation yet, have they?
No,
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
you're welcome. So we can get to the other questions. Are you done with your presentation, Patrick?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
And so the question that I've had and still have is about the 5 million per year or any amount above the 2.5 million, being able to use free cash to reduce the tax bill more than 2.5 million each year. Has that conversation happened?
So I started the conversation with the mayor today. At this point, we're not inclined to put any additional free cash on the table for this year or next year. We did 2.5 million this year and 2.5 million commitment next year is fair and balanced. What we want to do is try to avoid any major jumps in tax bills from this year to next year. If we reduce it too much one year, next year's tax bill may go up at an unsustainable rate. So at this point, that's where we are.
Well, that's why I think we asked for equal amount, 5 million, 5 million, like the 2.5, because it's the same scenario. And again, I'm gonna reiterate $216 on average of the increased tax bill that's already increased over 5 years, $618 on average is putting us close to $900 increase over 6 years, which is too much of a burden on seniors and too much of a burden on low income folks that cannot right now are in trouble with their tax bills. Some of them are going into receivership. There's just a bunch of things happening that I can't agree with this, this recommendation. Tim, Counselor Allen?
Yeah, I missed Friday's meeting, caught up with Patrick a little bit, but I just was able to locate the email here, so I'm not really looking at everything you guys are looking at. I don't have I'm on my phone, not on the iPad, so I've got a couple questions that don't require looking at the pages. TJ, just in terms of, I mean, I've been doing this for, I don't know, 12 years or something. Most years, we didn't have any money come from the city towards the tax rate, right? I mean, this may be the third year out of 12 that we've done that.
That is correct.
So one year was the $1 million. Oh God, that was, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. And that was when we were in the ceiling, levy ceiling problem. Correct?
Correct.
And then last year, what did we give? I think we gave the mayor put money in last year. Was it $1 million?
Another $1 million, correct.
So, what would the tax bill be this year if in the 9 other years where there was no money that came from the city side to relieve the tax bill at all? If we didn't do that this year, what would if there was no money coming from the city side?
Yeah, so if there was no money, free cash being put in, the average increase would have been $260 or so.
260. And by putting in the 2.5 million this year, we gets it down to like 216 or something.
Correct.
So it's $44 relief, or call it $50 of relief, for $2.5 million. And so it would have been 260 and now it's 216. And what Tracy is talking about is another 2.5 million. Do you have a number or what that would mean?
So it's roughly $25 for every $1 million that's put on the table.
TJ's right in his comment there. It's roughly $25 per million.
So it'd be another $60 or so with 2.5 million. So we go from 216 down to 156 or something like that. Okay. And the use of, what is the use of the free cash? I know we got more free cash than normal, but it was because of the pandemic and we didn't have to pay school transportation. Was that the main reason?
Yeah, so the generation of the free cash came from not paying for school transportation when they were not in school. And then the way we're approaching the thinking of the free cash is, I know $27 million is a lot of money. We're using 12 million of it for 12 million from ARPA, which is one-time revenue to balance fiscal 22's budget. I would like to replenish the $5 million in the stabilization reserve that was transferred to the law settlements account for the police department. We have another 2.7 million that needs to go in for OPEB that we've committed to through financial policies. Am I missing anything?
That's 20.
And then all in all, it leaves us a few $1 million to play. I mean, the 5 million. Excuse me, the 5 million, 2.5 million this year,
Yes.
and setting up a reserve of 2.5 million next year gets us to about 25 million. That leaves about 2.6 million for what may come up during fiscal 22, snow and ice, any major emergencies that we're not preparing for. So in my mind, 2.5 this year and 2.5 next year is fair and the right way to spend free cash, because once it's gone, it's gone. And we should get money back into the stabilization account as quickly as we can.
Okay, and so in that breakdown of the 27, I didn't hear pensions. So are we, how our pension thing goes up 4 or 5 million a year?
Yeah, so we're doing what's budgeted and agreed upon with the pension board, an aggressive schedule. We do not have anything extra into the pension system, which I would love to do, but we also got to look at market timing based upon if we kind of put a big influx of cash into the pension system. If we have a bad year, we could lose it. So I'd much rather get into stabilization reserves and appropriate it with a more aggressive schedule that goes up through 2036.
So we've been able to make the accelerated payments this year. I think it's 55 million or something like that. It would have been nice to be able to put some money in that, but okay. And I know taxes have gone up. Patrick, and I'm not sure the numbers we talked about yesterday were exactly the numbers I just heard here a few minutes ago. It was like $500 over the last 3 years or $500 over the last 6 years. I can't remember, but what's been the response of the public, to that? As we know, taxes have gone up. What do you hear in the department? Has it been, how taxing has it been? Have people been filing for more abatements, all that sort of thing? Do you have anything you can give us on that?
Sure. So I think people recognize that the market for residential is extremely strong the last couple of years. So people have an opportunity to file an overvalue application. That information is not public, so I can't necessarily give specific numbers. However, I will say we've had the fewest number ever the last couple of years. And I think that's just a recognition that the market is so strong for residential. They see what their neighbor's house is selling for. And that's our legal obligation, is to assess people at the full and fair cash value. So thank you for the question.
And to piggyback off that, I just did a tax taking for delinquent property taxes. There's 190 parcels. It was the lowest ever since my assistant collector's been working for 18 years. Normally it's in the 500 to 600 range.
And Chris, what was that?
Say that again. What was that? The parcel taking?
So we recently did in October the tax title taking for fiscal 2019. The total number of parcels was around 190. That's the lowest in 18 years that we've had.
Could it be because there was COVID relief? There wasn't, you couldn't take a parcel, you couldn't, they had mortgage things going on.
So with the tax taking, that was not delayed at all. Westfield actually did their tax taking on time the last 2 fiscal years. Mm-hmm. I've never seen our tax collection rate this high. Normally our tax takings is around the 500 to 600 range.
Well, that's great. That's great news.
That's good news.
Do you have any more questions?
No, I'm just trying to come up with questions that I think would give us a little more information different than just looking at the rate. No, that's it for now. Thank you, Tracy.
Okay. So I just wanted to comment on a couple of things that you did say, Tim. And one of them is you going back 14 years. I remember when I joined the finance team, we were just getting out of the Financial Control Board's control. And at that time, the tax bills were going down. So we didn't need to put more money toward lowering the tax bill because they were going down because of that. So I'm looking at some of the numbers that I took a picture of, and in 2013, the tax bills went down $146, up $91 the following year, and then down $11 the year after that. So we didn't need money to go toward lowering the bill, which we also didn't have. We never had this amount of free cash since I worked in the finance department. We never had $27 million of free cash, and I would much rather pay $5 million to lowering the tax bill than replenishing reserves for some police misconduct cases. We could do that over time, or maybe replenish it next year, but I would much rather reduce our citizens who actually put this money into free cash. This is the taxpayers' money, so they should be utilizing the money to get relief and not police misconduct cases. So I just wanted to make a note of that. While we didn't have the money in the past to reduce the tax bill, we have it now. And there was years that we didn't need the money to reduce the tax bills because they were automatically going down. So I just wanted to make those points, and your points are well taken as well. But I don't want people that may not be familiar with what happened with the tax bills over the years to be misguided by that information, because we didn't always need to put money toward the tax bills like we do now. So, Councilor Hurst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. TJ, can you give me that breakdown again in terms of how much is going to reserves? Is it 7.5 million roughly that is going into the reserves? Is that accurate or no?
Well, I'll just go through the whole thing. So we use 12 million of one-time revenue from the rescue plan dollars being allowed by the Treasury Department. That's one-time revenue built into our budget to solve the budget gap. Then we have the 2.5 this year.
Hold on real quick, TJ. So we got $12 million from ARPA funding that's going into the reserves.
For lost revenue, revenue portion.
For lost revenue.
Yep.
But we obviously, when you say lost revenue, we obviously were able to make do, right? Like, I guess we obviously were able to make do. So we're adding that 12 million to the stabilization. Am I missing something there?
No,
that's what we told our. Okay.
We want to control so next year we start out of the gate 12 million in the hole. Add in any cost of living increase, any cost of inflation, anything that added to the budget, which our deficit will go to 20 million or more. And
I got you. So yours is lost revenue for this coming year. I'm sorry, it's not lost revenue for the previous year. It's lost revenue that
we built it into the current fiscal year based upon the revenue we lost from the previous fiscal year. So we built it in for July 1st to June 30th to ensure we didn't have any budget cuts, knowing that ARPA funds were coming and that we were going to looking at some free cash numbers that were going to be on the higher side. But
so that money's already spent. Maybe that's a better question. Is that money already spent?
Money built into our budget as a revenue source to balance and to solve for the deficit.
Got it. Okay. So what's the next one? I'm sorry.
The next one would be the 5 million that was recently passed.
Am I breaking up?
Yeah, a little bit, but we could hear you.
And then there's another 5 million.
Hold on, TJ. I want to make sure he can hear us. Can you hear us, Justin?
Yeah, I can. I'm actually getting back onto my own internet. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I'm good. I'm good
Okay.
now. Go ahead, TJ.
The second 5 million is 2.5 million this year and 2.5 million in a separate stabilization reserve account for taxes for next year. So that's another 5.
So why are we putting that 2.5 million into the stabilization funds for next year? That's just going into this. You're just committing that money.
Just committing it and setting aside so nothing happens to it.
Okay. All right. So regardless of what happens fiscally, that 2.5 million you're saying is going to be used for next year.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. Was there anything else?
So then we have 2.7 million that has to go into OPEB trust fund that we created for roughly a total of 25 million.
Got it.
So 2.6, 2.7-ish is available for emergencies for the remainder of fiscal 2022.
Got it. Okay.
So you're counting the 12 million that we received in ARPA funds, then the 10, then the 2.7.
You got it.
So,
but we might not need 12 million next year. We may not need it because that was lost revenue. And if we're doing as well as we say we are, we may not need it because we might not have 12 million in lost revenue next year.
Correct. Exactly. So we may not need all 12 million, but I'd like to shore up against it and raise our reserve levels beyond where we're at now.
So that 12.7 was spread out throughout the budget, or was that, where did the bulk of that go?
It's just a revenue source built into FY22's budget. Not really spread out. It's revenue that we factored in as revenue that we can collect.
So in FY21, we lost about 12 million in revenue. We were able to get that back from ARPA funds because of COVID-19. So now you're saying, I want to put in the reserves 12 million in case we lose 12 million of lost revenue again. However, Chris just said, this is the best tax revenue collection that we've had in a long time. Why would we think we're going to lose 12 million again unless we anticipate another pandemic?
I'm saying we use 12 million of one-time revenue to balance the budget. And that, I would like to shore up against that because I can't start out the gate with 12. I started the gate next year's revenue budget without $12 million. Now, is that real? I can't tell you on November 23rd that that is real as of right now. But my budget planning side is to set it aside to make sure that it's available so we're not cutting services in fiscal 23 or 24.
Even though we're having the best tax collection rate we've ever had right now. We want to set aside 12 million of reserves, even though we're having the best collection rate right now.
That is my professional advice and as for financial as the CFO, correct.
All right.
What did we have set aside last year?
Or
Did we have 12.7 million set aside last year in reserves in the event that things faltered? Did we have a significant amount?
no, we were prepared to do budget cuts and to cut services and to balance the budget. We just didn't have
Because
to do that.
we didn't cut any services last year, so we weren't prepared for that because we voted on the budget. We didn't cut any services, so we were not prepared for that, and we didn't put 12 million of reserves for lost revenue in the budget. So this part don't really make sense to me. I mean, you're the financial expert, but these things didn't happen last year because there was no pandemic. So it doesn't really make sense if we're having the best revenue collection ever.
If you have a $20 million deficit out of the gate and you could solve 8 million of that, but still have 12 million you have to cut, but then you don't have to cut 12 million anymore. You take this one-time revenue, plug it in, then you got 20 million balanced. Next year, I don't have 12 million anymore.
What's in the revenue? What's in the reserves account right now?
43 million in the stabilization reserve account as of now.
And how much do we have to have in there by the law, state law?
5 to 15%
Of,
the general fund budget.
and the general fund budget is,
730 million.
so 5% of that? 5 to 7?
I think it's like 5 to 15, right?
Right, and so the other stuff that the committee needs to understand is I don't want to be at the minimums of my reserve. I want to be at the maximums because that looks great on bond ratings. It looks great to Wall Street. It allows us to do all of the stuff that we haven't been able to do. It sets us up for long-term success as a city. I do not want to go back to the control board days. I've been here since then. So my advice has always been conservative, and I think my track record speaks for itself. But that's been my advice and trying to weigh fairness to the taxpayers, weigh future needs, weigh a pension system that needs to have additional funding, weigh a capital plan that needs to get funded. My role is to do all that. So yes, is it a little conservative, 12 million? Maybe. But I would say let's shore up against it so we know we have it available. This market's not going to last forever. We know recessions are cyclical. I want to be ready with a lot more reserves than we had going into 2008 with the ability, you build up reserves during the good times so you can use the reserves in bad times. And you keep your services level for the taxpayers, and that's my job.
And I think you're doing a great job at it, TJ, and I think you've done a great job since I've known you. However, this 12 million and what we haven't really lost and we may not lose in money collected isn't making sense to me when we can reduce the property tax value for the residents by $5 million more. I probably agree to 7 more going into the reserves with the 5 going to the reserves for the police misconduct. But we're talking about 7 and 12, 19 million going into the reserves. Plus the additional 2 that we had, that's 21 million when we could do better for the community. Doesn't make sense to me, but I'm gonna move. Councilor Hurst, are you?
So my only comment, and I appreciate both you and TJ for helping me to understand this better. The 2.5 million with respect to the reduction that taxpayers are going to see in their property bill. You said that equals roughly 40% across the board, $40 across the board. Is that, it equates to a $40 reduction, TJ? Or is it a little bit more? 60?
So it goes from 266 to 216 by putting the 2.5 million on the table.
Okay, so roughly $50. Is that?
Roughly, I'll let Matt or Patrick explain if I'm missing something.
Councilor Hurst, it's about $25 for every 1 million. So if we do 2.5 times 25, it's roughly 66, 62.
Okay.
So you can add $2 to the 216. So really it's 278 really what it would be.
And that's equally, correct?
Excuse me?
That's equally across the board, right?
To all average, this is the average impact of the average single family.
So I guess my frustration is probably the same frustration that I had last year, TJ. And that is that I don't want it to be spread equally. I appreciate that you're using $2.5 million in free cash. The problem that I have is that you're spreading it out equally. And I would much prefer that you spread it out equitably. And I know it probably takes a lot of work to figure out who's struggling. But, you know, $60 for me ain't gonna move the needle, right? Like I give my $60 away to somebody who really needs it. So I know it took a lot of time and, you know, it was gonna take all sorts of extra effort, but we had a year. And so, I mean, I'm gonna ask you to try to do the same thing this year that I asked last year. We gotta figure out a system in which it is spread equitably, not equally. And until we do that, you ain't really helping. Because to the person that, you know, is struggling significantly, that $60 doesn't mean anything. Very little. You know? So I mean, we gotta put the work in.
Councilor Hurst, I understand and understood it last year, understand it again this year. That is something we cannot do the way the system is set up. And that, you know, so what we can do around that is what we're doing with all the other rental assistance, utility assistance, mortgage assistance, other funding that we're putting available to help ease the burden for those that need it the most. If there was a way that I could do it, you know, handpick and cherry pick how we implement it, I would like to do that as well. Work, you know, I don't mind doing extra work for their thing, but there's just no legal way I can do what you're asking.
So I'd like to see what tells me that you can. So if you can send me that information, that'd be greatly appreciated. And then I'll be the decision maker in terms of what you can and you can't do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councilor Hurst. Councilor Davila, and then Freddie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening to everybody. I just want to be clear. First, on these metrics that you guys provided, as long as we put here on the video, as long as we stay within these parameters, we will be fulfilling our obligation for tax collection, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, so what is the current bond rating for the city? Is it A or A minus?
Double A minus.
Double A minus, and that's the best we ever been, right?
Correct.
Okay, and now I guess my question, if I may, Madam Chair, might be addressed to either TJ or Nancy Creed, if I may. Well, before I ask that question, so TJ, the mayor's recommendation is 18.82 for residential and 39.4 for business, correct?
Correct.
That means that the average tax bill will be $216 increase for both businesses and residential, correct?
No.
That will be per thousand?
Councilor, what you're looking at here is the average increase for the residential, average single-family homeowner.
Okay.
We did talk in part of the presentation, which if you weren't online for that earlier, you have it as an email as well. There is an average value tax increase for commercial, but as we kind of talked about, that's really not a super useful metric. because the commercial properties are so vastly different. There's really not an average, a warehouse or the average retail establishment. So it's a really not super helpful, but we did present that as well.
Right, I understood you, but so how do we then come up with a 39.4? We must use some sort of a matrix.
So that's, yes, so what this body is tasked with is determining the residential tax factor. So what we have to do is make a recommendation to the full city council on a tax factor. So the tax factors you have are the options that we have available to us. So if you pick one of the tax factors, that not only determines what the residential rate, but it also determines the corresponding commercial rate.
Got you. All right. Now, question either TJ or Nancy, Ms. Nancy Cree, do we have any kind of assessment anywhere within the city or the Chamber of Commerce about the true impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our business industry here in the city? Anybody?
Nancy, I'll defer to you if you have better information. I know you spouted off a bunch of stuff last meeting about the impact that has been happening to the businesses.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if we really see a true impact, counselor, because we're not through it yet.
Mhm.
And I think we're not going to really see the true impact until late in 2022 when we really come out of this. I can tell you that a recent poll that we did maybe a week, 2 weeks ago, of our members is close to 60% say they are still being greatly impacted by COVID. So they're still buying PPP. They're still, shutting down when they need to do the deep cleans because they're having COVID spikes. So all of that, and add on, I guess, a pretty low business confidence index. I think that's probably the best statistics that I can give you, because we really won't see the full impact until 2022.
Now, Ms. Cree, will you be able to tell me as to, you said roughly 60% of the industry are somehow impacted, but would you be able to tell me how many within the business industry have closed shops because of the pandemic? How much jobs we're not getting back? Would you be able to give me that number?
I don't actually have that data at my fingertips. I can certainly do a deep dive and see if I can find that.
Right.
I know that people have not brought their workforce 100% back. I mean, I can speak for the chamber. We had 5 people. We are running at 1. And I don't foresee us bringing, because of budgetary constraints, bringing any of those folks back until end of 2022, probably early 2023.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Cree.
Counselor, before you continue, TJ has to leave at 6. Is there anyone from the finance team that can stay a little bit beyond that to maybe like 6:15 so we can try to get through this conversation?
Yeah, so Pat Burns and Lindsay can speak to probably virtually anything that I have already spoken to if there's any issues.
Okay, so if you can just allow us 15.
I can take, if there's any specific questions that you want to direct at me, I can take a couple final question or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you answered all that I had, but I don't know about other counselors. I know you have to go get your family, and so does everybody.
Yeah,
So we're gonna, I know, Counselor, 1 second.
Yeah.
1 second. We're gonna reduce the amount of questions to 3, so we can get through this. And I'm sorry I took up a lot of the questions, and so did Counselor Hurst, but I didn't realize time was ticking away so fast. And I'm just gonna ask the finance team to stay just maybe 15 minutes more, and the rest of the committee. So
I just have one last question.
Sure.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. TJ, before you go, if I may, my last question is, I did notice that comparing 2020 versus 2021, the decrease for the residential is 8 cents. And for the business is 19 cents. Can you give me a little overview of that? Why the difference?
So that's where we landed in order to acknowledge what the business community has been through as well, in terms of where they've been throughout COVID. There's also a layer of having to reduce the business burden, because if you get to the max shift, it has a doomsday scenario for the city. And I will let these gentlemen explain it way more than I can, but there is a point where there's a max shift where the tax bills could go up hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And we are trying to get the commercial rate down a bit more. That's why 8 cents for the residential and 19 for the business community made the most sense for our recommendation.
All right, thank you, TJ. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor.
You're muted, Councilor Whitfield.
Sorry about that. Counselor Allen, followed by Counselor Letterman.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Counselor Whitfield. You made good points before on that supplementing thing. That was a good point. So I'm just curious, Patrick or whomever, can you give the average? I know it's flawed, this average, the average single family tax, the thing that's going up 216 if we use those numbers.
Sure.
What will that number be? What was that number 12 years ago? And what is it now?
So the average
Tax bill.
So in 2010, the average single-family tax bill was $2,685. The average tax bill for this year under the proposed rate would be $3,484.
So 2065 and versus 3484.
2685.
Oh, 2265.
2,685.
Could you just do it? And I'm not hearing you. Just read the 4 digits.
2,685.
All right, great. So it's gone. So it's $800, almost to the dollar. It's $800, gone up $800 in 12 years. All right, I'll figure out what that is. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Letterman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. I just wanted to make sure, because we did have this conversation last year as well, that when folks are reaching out to the collector's office with trouble around their tax bills, I'm thinking especially of senior citizens who may own their homes, but who are actually paying their tax bills, just quarterly, that they are getting referred out to the assistance programs that exist, because those programs can be used for tax bills in the event that somebody owns their home. If they don't own their home, they're likely escrowing. And at that point, they could get the mortgage assistance. So are we referring folks to those programs? And to that same point, last year, we had discussed trying to find some way to do outreach, either following the bill or as a part of the bill to those referral to those programs. I know that did not happen. So I'm wondering what the plan is this year. So those are the 2 questions. Are we referring people to the programs, and do we have any outreach planned relative to that ahead of or following the bill mailing?
I can't speak to the collector's office, but Councilor Letterman, we had a conversation a few months ago where we sort of learned that for the first time. So it has come up in the few conversations that we've had where people have called about tax bills. But we really don't honestly get that many calls in general. I can let Chris answer.
I can tell you that if we get called and somebody says, I'm having difficulty paying my taxes, we will refer them to wayfinders. We will let them know about the circuit breaker. I will tell people, write this down, make a note of it. If your things add up to a certain amount, talk to your accountant. You can deduct it and get it back from your state and federal taxes. So I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've actually gotten somebody ask me about this since I've been treasurer collector. But yeah, that's what we do. And then if we think there's city programs, we will send them down to the assessor's office to see if they qualify for any of the city abatements.
Right. Well, I would say whether they call or not, if we have folks who are getting notices that they're getting tax foreclosed, they should be notified of the program. So we need to build that into our process.
With the liens, yes, they do. That does go out in the introductory letter from Revenue Service, our deputy tax collector, for liens. At least it's supposed to.
Okay, yeah, because that's what we want to make sure is that people are utilizing these services. So that I agree about spreading as equitably as possible, but in the meantime, that is one tool we do have available to us is those funds, which are unprecedented. So we'll stay on top of that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
But I do remember, Councilor Letterman, that you did ask last year if they can get a supplement in the bills, and it was going to be worked on with the bills that go out, not after, not when they're already in trouble. Before all that happens, can we be proactive and get the supplement in the bills? And you asked that last year, but when we got the bills, it didn't happen. So that is the more important question. More important than what we do, what we can do to be proactive in the future is more of the question. And I do see your hand, Nancy and Freddie. I just wanted to ask Pat Burns one question first, if I may, about tax revenue, property tax collection. Where are we currently? Are we behind? Because I just want to understand why we want to put $12 million in reserves for fund money that we're not losing if we're not losing it currently. So Pat Burns, can you please let us know where we are?
We're ahead of schedule on our tax collections. We're doing very well. Part of that is some of the prior year tax collections. I think what TJ's point was on the 12 million is that's actually a revenue source in our budget this year. That's balancing our budget. And that's a one-time revenue source. And unfortunately, we're not going to have again next year. And I believe that was TJ was trying to say we want to kind of guard against that next year. Normally, if we have a one-time revenue source, we use that for a one-time expense, not ongoing expenses.
Right. So why do we have a one-time, why do we need a one-time relief for collections? Why do we need that?
This wouldn't be for tax collections. This was actually lost revenue. It was a variety of revenues that we lost during the pandemic.
So it's pandemic related why we lost it. And we're still in the pandemic, but we're kind of like coming out of it. And so when you set the revenue and you say, this is what we think that we can raise in the city of Springfield for that fiscal year. Is that correct?
Correct.
When you set the revenue budget. So when we set that revenue budget for FY21, we started losing revenue. Outside of that lost revenue, are we on track for what we set in the budget, or will we still be at a loss if we didn't have the 12 million?
We're actually running ahead on our revenue.
As to what we set in FY21 without the 12 million?
Well, the 12 million is a component of our revenue budget. So that's 100% collected in essence.
So we're running ahead because of the 12 million. If we didn't have the 12 million, we would be behind.
Line by line in our revenue budget. We're over.
But if we didn't have the 12 million in the revenue budget, would we be behind in our collections?
We would have had to cut the budget back in June to make up for that 12 million. So basically, it's a one-time revenue source that we're not going to see again.
How far ahead are we? Maybe that's a better question. Are we ahead by 12 million?
Not right now, no.
Where are we? How much ahead are we about?
It's hard to quantify that, but I only have records through October. There's certain line items that we're running far ahead on, but certain line items that we're running low on also. I mean, our major component of our budget is state aid, which is going to be equal to what was budgeted based on the cherry sheet. So,
and for state aid, is it level? Is it going to be more for next year? We don't know yet.
It's going to be level. It's always it's level. What was passed by the Senate.
So if you looked at the grand total of the revenue right now, how much ahead are we? Like, we projected an amount, how much more of that amount are we? Do you have that? If not, you could send it to me.
I don't. We're only 4 months through the fiscal year, so really it's kind of hard to project that out at this point.
Tracy, I can tell you in the budget office, when we do our revenue projections, we are not projecting a $12 million surplus right now.
Okay, do we know what we're projecting?
I don't know off the top of my head. Again, we're only 4 months in. There's a lot of things we don't know.
Mhm.
But as of right now, again, we're doing 8 months of unknown against 4 months of actuals, which I'm sure you understand. And we're not projecting a $12 million surplus at this point.
Okay, so let me say for FY20, did we have a major loss in FY20?
In FY20.
Yes, like from June, June 30th, July 1st, our budget started. So as of June 30th, did we have a major loss in revenue?
In fiscal year 20,
Yes.
we were under on our revenue, but we saved a lot of money on the expenditure side. A lot of that was school transportation again.
Mhm. So that's why we have this big free cash number,
We had,
right? Okay.
I was just
All
gonna say, FY20, at the end of FY20, we did come under revenue, but we also had a spending freeze in place that we were really, really strict on because we had to keep into consideration revenue was dropping and we had no idea what the collections were gonna be.
Okay. So if we add, so right now in our reserves, we got about 7%. And we're supposed to be between 5 and 15,
Correct.
and we're about 7%,
6%.
6%. Okay.
That's the budget, because our reserves need to grow to stay within that 5 to.
Right, because our budget grows, reserves need to grow, but I don't think reserves need to grow 21 million. Sorry, I'm not gonna agree with that. When we can be helping people during COVID, reduce their tax liability, start some type of account like Councilor Hurst said, where we can manage and people can apply for some funding. I don't know if we can do that with reserves or free cash. I'm not sure on that rule. Another thing that we can do is take some of the free cash and put some information like Councilor Letterman suggested into the tax bills so people know their resources ahead of time. That's something that we could do with the free cash that I can definitely support. But 21 million going to free cash when we have a community that is struggling, cannot get with that. I'm sorry. Nancy, I'm sorry I put you on hold. I want you to speak and then Freddie, and then we'll wrap up because I don't think it'll be an agreement here.
That's okay, Madam Chairwoman. My question was long before this conversation, so it seems fairly irrelevant at this point, so I won't belabor it.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Nancy. I'm in a passionate day today. Freddie.
I think to everybody's point, I think, we and again, I'm not part of the budget process in any way. I'm just involved in the tax committee portion of it, which directly and indirectly relates to the budget. So I know you guys said you guys passed, we had a revenue loss. These are the key things that I'm hearing. We had a revenue loss, but we did not have any cuts in the budget whatsoever. And the tight spending freeze was lifted basically. So I guess I don't understand if we did have a revenue loss and then we do have other things that, like Madam Chair mentioned that we have to pay as far as liabilities from a city point of view, why would there be no budget cuts? And why would the spending freeze be lifted? Because ultimately we go back and forth in this conversation as far as setting the rate. I don't think there's anyone on this entire committee that is going to be happy with any of the rates. It's just a matter of we have to decide on one because it has to be set. If it didn't have to be set, we probably would never be able to agree on one to actually set. So I guess it's more of a pointing out that maybe there should have been some budget cuts and maybe that spending freeze shouldn't have been lifted at this time because we are not able to provide relief and we haven't been able to provide relief, I would say, in the last 5 years that I've been on this committee. So I just want to point that out.
That's a good segue, Freddie. So what we are tasked with is to make a recommendation to the full city council. I don't know if anyone on the committee would like to make a motion to accept one of the residential tax factors or not.
Councilor Hurst. So I'm in a conundrum because I don't want to increase the business side because they also struggled. And I don't want to stay at 216 for the residents because they struggled during the pandemic. And I think that is sad, disappointing that the administration during a pandemic and the coronavirus did not say, we got all this free cash, let's do more to take the burden off of the residents of the city of Springfield, who ultimately, outside of state money that also is taxpayer money, and that comes from the federal government and the state and down to the local level, is taxpayer money. Like, this is where it comes from. And we don't want to use our own money to reduce the tax liability, that the burden on our seniors and the burden on our low income family and the burden on our veterans and the burden on our people with disabilities. We don't want to do that. I cannot fathom that. I don't know why the mayor wouldn't want to do this. Yet every time police misconduct come up, police misconduct, 6 million here, 5 million there, we got to replenish that. Also taxpayer money. We got to replenish that every time. I cannot agree with this system. I cannot agree with this mayor. This is horrible management of the city of Springfield when it comes down to finance, in my opinion. Councilor Davila.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just gonna make a quick comment. We should wait until we have full recommendation from the tax committee before we do anything. Just given the professional courtesy of coming up with a recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I wanted to, Nancy, do you have a tax rate, or are you happy with the mayor's recommendation? And Freddie, did you look at, and Richard, did you guys look at the tax rate, and do you have a recommendation?
Thank you. I was actually going to reiterate our support for the mayor's rate, because I do think it does find a balance. When I look at the rate, it's a 5% decrease for residents. It's a 5% decrease for business. That just seems to be fair. And if we're trying to find common ground, kind of that equal reduction just seems to make sense for me, especially when you go back to that previous slide that shows the shift and the burden continuing to be increased on business. I think a 5% reduction for both just seems fair to me. I don't know if I can make a motion, but I'm going to make a motion.
Thank you. I appreciate your feedback. Freddie?
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's there's not going to be any rate that we set that anybody here is really going to be truly happy with. There's no way we can do that based on the information that we have and what we're taxed with. So, but ultimately, I mean, I agree with Nancy. We do have to come up with some type of recommendation, and I agree with Nancy on both of them reducing by 5%. I wish we could do a lot more, like Madam Chair mentioned, about, you know, freeing up a lot more of the free cash and giving a bigger relief to the residents. But I think our hands are kind of tied on that, where I think it makes logical sense to go with the mayor's recommendation, because I feel like our hands are tied.
So we're going with a recommendation because we're being forced to, because our hands are tied. We don't have to go with anything.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely not going to support something that ties my hand, but I will.
So you're saying we can move, you're saying we can move forward without a recommendation, basically?
No, we can't, but we can still discuss it. We can still contact the mayor. We can still tell the mayor how we feel about free cash. We can do these things. We don't have to do anything right now because of our hands tied. Like, do you make decisions about businesses or what you're selling because your hands are tied?
Not really.
That's like, are you gonna make decisions about your household because your hands are tied? My kids are tying my hands, so I'm gonna go ahead and go with that.
Can you pull up our the rates again, just so we can all kind of like say where we would be at?
Sure. So here's the rates. And Freddie, to your point, John, let me just walk you through a few steps. The assessors determine what the levy is. The city council 6 months ago was charged with cutting the budget if they chose to. So we're faced today with the decision on how to spread the levy out among residents and commercial property. That really is the number one goal here, is to determine how we split. So here's that penny rate sheet again. And to Councilor Davia, all of these options would fund the budget. These aren't the only options. We just felt that these were the most relevant options. And again, for those that maybe weren't here before, the yellow highlight is where we were last year, and the orange is the mayor's recommendation.
Madam Chairman, if I may, quick question.
Sure.
Thank you. I know TJ left, but I know relating to the ARPA money, are we going to be giving possibly a second round later on for business?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
For the ARPA money, are we possibly going to be doing a second round after this round is completed towards businesses?
Well, the RFP is a rolling RFP and it's ongoing. For the small business.
Right, so I do recall saying that there was going to be a moratorium at some point, and then possibly resuming they were going to reassess, if I recall correctly.
Up until where it's on a rolling application process right now. Depending on the volume, we don't know what the volume is going to be. There might be a time that we have to stop the process just so we can get through the volume that we have and then potentially pick it back up. But there's no end date as of right now.
So for a well-needed community, there's always a possibility that we could also give some relief down the road if needed, correct? As it relates to ARPA?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I mean, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Richard?
Yes. I did want to say that I did want to really express my disappointment in this process. I think that a couple of things have become pretty clear to me. And one of them is throughout this process, we kind of reduced folks that I am familiar with, homeowners and residents of the city, particularly those who are new homeowners and low income and those folks who are on fixed incomes, that this process doesn't really speak at all to equity, and it doesn't speak at all to how it is that these folks who might not have ready access to all of the information that many of you have and many of us may have to access some of the things that might mitigate their burdens in terms of trying to maintain control over the properties that they have invested their lives in, essentially. And what I'm hearing is that those folks who are most disproportionately impacted in terms of homeowners don't have any relief, and they don't have any recourse. I heard Councilor Letterman talk about the process that was kind of proposed on last year with regard to notifying folks and providing folks with guidance in terms of accessing some support around their tax burdens when they've gotten in trouble or try to preempt that. And I hear the collector speak to the fact that he doesn't receive calls. And I just want to go on record as helping folks understand that there are so many people who don't know to call your office until they receive that red letter or that letter that says that you are delinquent and we are now considering other alternatives for your land and your property. I think that if there are resources that the city has that come from the taxpayers, that our first choice should always be to try and make sure that the taxpayers see a benefit from their investment in their taxes. And I don't know that there's a straight line to do that. I heard TJ say that it's not possible, that the rules don't allow for equity. And I don't know that, I'm hopeful that he can show us where that is a fact, because if that is a fact, then we need to be speaking to somebody about changing the rules. Because again, Springfield, as I've grown up, has been dubbed the city of homes. And I know a number of individuals who have strived most of their adult lives to become homeowners. They come into the game a little late. Now they have property, they want to maintain it. But again, they're stymied by a lot of the costs associated with taxes and this kind of thing. So I just want to say that don't lose sight of the fact that not all households are equal. You know, you have parts of the city who, you know, a $16 increase or whatever the increase is really doesn't move the needle, as was said. But for others, it's a burden. And so I want us to be thoughtful about those folks who are really just hoping to maintain their houses in their homes.
So as far as the mayor recommendation for the tax rate, I mean, it's between me and you. And I will say, I will go on record saying that the majority of the committee agrees with the mayor's recommendation, and Freddie stays his stance. But I'm gonna say this, while the business community takes a big shift of the burden, a lot of them don't live in the city of Springfield. They come here, they make money, they do hire employees and things like that. So I'm not saying they're not a benefit to the city, but a lot of them don't live here. And so they take their money and they go back to their communities and they live and they pay their own property taxes and things like that. And while I can appreciate the jobs that they bring to the community, and while I can appreciate the revenue that they do draw to the community, a lot of them don't spend it here. I don't want to increase the burden for the business community, but I will never increase a bill by $216 for the residents, because guess what? I was the low income family when I first purchased my home. And none of you, I don't know if any of you have been in my situation before, and you get a tax bill or your mortgage bill go up and you're like, oh, how am I going to take care of that? I don't know if you understand that, as if you're somebody who was a single mom who had to figure it out. I don't know if any of you understand how hurtful and painful that burden is. I don't know if the mayor understands it, and if he doesn't, then we need to reconsider who we have as mayor, because that is disheartening. And so if you've never been in a situation where the tax burden or your mortgage payment or the bills that you have increased and you had no say so in that system, and you had no say so in that process, then you wouldn't understand how big of a deal $216 over 4 months or however it's spread out affects somebody's household. I know it personally because I was a young mom, I was a young homeowner, and I had to deal with this. And I wasn't as educated on that process as I am now. I didn't even know why sometimes my bill was increasing. I didn't even know. And now that I know, I'm the one who get the phone calls that my bill increased. This is crazy. How can I? And if you don't live that life either, you don't know how that pain affects someone who does always hear the information about the tax bill. And the mayor should be ashamed of himself that he wants to put $21 million in reserves, and we could take another $5 million to do the right thing. To even give somebody another $66 decrease means a lot. That is shameful. That is shameful. People need to try to understand and sit in people's shoes and understand how the burden really affects the city of Springfield and the city of Springfield residents. My mom and my dad are on fixed incomes, and every single tax bill, I have to hear about how their bill went up. Last year, I paid the difference because they're on fixed income. So I paid the difference because I'm now in a financial situation that I'm able to do that. What about people who don't have me? So let's think about this. It's not just about we want to put more money in reserves. We want to be at 8% instead of the 7.9% that we're at. We want to do better than that. Let's think about doing better for the community. Nancy, Victor, Freddie, and then I'm going to give Richard the opportunity to say which way he's going to vote, and we're going to leave it at that because I do not accept this tax rate as presented.
With all due respect, Madam Chair, relative to the business community, I'm not sure if I don't think I would be doing my job if I didn't remind this committee that while you may think we aren't homeowners, we do carry a greater burden of the taxes. And I'm going to take inflation out of it, but I just want to remind the committee that for every dollar that is paid in taxes, a resident uses $1.19 worth of services. But for that same dollar that a business pays, they use 29 cents of services. So while we may not own a home, we are certainly paying our fair share. So with all due respect, I just wanted to make that point.
I definitely understand that, Nancy, and I respect it. I don't want to shift the burden to the businesses either. Freddie?
Just listening to what you were saying, if we did, let's say we took a different route and we did keep the commercial grade the same, then we would be at a 18.75 for the residential factor, which is what they highlighted right there. Which would make it, instead of an average $216 increase, it would make it a $203 increase. And I know it's not a big difference, but that would be without adding additional burden to the commercial, but still taking away some burden on the residential.
I would caution against that because the value increase has been seen on the residential side and not necessarily the commercial side. And as I've said earlier, there is a max shift that the city of Springfield can put onto the commercial, industrial, and personal property. And if this trend continues with the residential market increasing at a greater rate than the commercial market, we, in a few years, not too distant future, will be up against that shift, which then we're now stuck with potential sort of increases for residential at that point, because we can no longer shift any of the burden, extra burden, onto the CIP. So the mayor's recommended rate was strategic in the sense that it sort of allows, it is an increase in the shift, but it's not, it just sort of helps mitigate for a future increase in the future increases in values for the residential side.
Although TJ just said we're looking at a recession coming where the values normally decrease.
That's true. If a recession hits, then right, the general homeowner market would decrease. And frankly, I'm not sure necessarily anyone wants that necessarily, but that is true.
Okay. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, if I may.
No, I was seeing if Freddie was done. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just, like I said, it, regardless of how we word it, it's tough to come up with a recommendation. So I know Nancy likes the mayor's. I kind of like the balance of it, but I wouldn't mind seeing the residents save more money. But then I heard what the assessor's office just said as well, where we have to be cautioned with that. So again, it's kind of like, we don't really have too many options here. So, I don't know, Tracy, do you have, Madam Chair, do you have a recommendation on your end?
I think I would look more at the 1877 line and the 3920. It's $8. I mean, yeah, it's $9 difference, but it's lower. I would personally like to get under the 200 mark, but we're not going to be able to do that without giving more burden to the business community. If I had to suggest something, it's still a small reduction for the business community, and it's more of a reduction for the taxpayers.
So
the residential.
That was kind of outstanding. No one seconded it yet, so I'm not really sure kind of where we stand with that.
Yeah, I was waiting for Richard and Freddie to make a decision because it's a no for me. It's a yes for Nancy. And so we got to hear from Freddie and Richard on the mayor's recommendation. If the mayor can't come back to the drawing board with using more free cash to reduce that tax burden, it's a no for me. The tax bill increase is a no for me.
Madam, I have a procedural question. Madam Chair, I have a procedural question.
Sure.
So this is the finance meeting. Is the finance advisory committee going to make a vote now?
It's not the finance. It's more the tax rate setting committee, which is Freddie, Richard, Nancy, and myself.
No, I understand that, but
we have to come up with a recommendation.
No, I understand that, but I unless I fell asleep in class, wasn't this a finance committee meeting?
This is, but the recommendation is coming from us. Or am I wrong?
I got it.
I could be wrong. You and Tim could be. I don't know.
No, I believe there's a tax committee. I don't think it's 4 people. I think it's 5. Would Patrick be on that committee as well?
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, Patrick's on it. So
Well, the
Yeah.
reason I ask is usually they vote separately at another meeting, they tell us, but if that's how we're doing it this year, that's your prerogative. Okay, just to be sure. So we are the finance members and not voting on this recommendation right now.
Correct.
Okay, other than the Madam Chair. Okay, gotcha. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Well, Madam Chair, I'm so sorry if I may.
Yes.
The question, just all this is gonna factor in my decision. Are we expecting some sort of water and sewer relief in the future for the homeowners? Did I hear that?
Can you
somewhere?
repeat that?
Did we talk about some sort of a tax relief for the water bill for the homeowners with the new loan that we got? Because I feel like I might have heard that somewhere.
No,
We got
not
half
in
a
this
billion
meeting. This
dollars.
is specifically just to talk about.
No, I
the tax
realize that, but I'm
rate.
saying,
Yeah.
I'm just asking if the home owners are gonna be getting a break, because that would be another break for them. I just want to, as part of my decision-making, it's a factor. If, Lindsay, if you know the answer to that.
Oh, I don't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, to
Counselor.
Lindsay.
Oh, Nancy.
Lindsay.
Oh, Lindsay. I'm sorry.
What's the question?
Did I hear with this new $500 million loan that we got for the water and sewer department, is there some sort of tax relief that might be coming down the pipes for the homeowners?
Tax relief or?
Or some sort of relief? I feel like somehow it might have.
Yeah, I don't know, Councilor Davila.
Okay. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm done with my questions.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Allen and Counselor Hurst, I know that you had your hand raised as well. And then we're going to make our final decisions and live with them, I guess.
Yeah, we've addressed mine. I was going to ask who the members of the tax committee were, so I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Hurst, I seen your hand before you put it down. Did you have any additional comments before?
I was just gonna say, I appreciate the vibrant discussion. As long as I've been on the council, I haven't seen it quite like this. And I think, folks have raised some very valid points. It also seems to me like, that we might be amenable, or folks might be amenable to the mayor's rate if there was a larger commitment from the mayor in terms of reducing the burden on taxpayers, which doesn't seem to be the case with respect to the 2.5 million. Whether it's, whether he finds a way to spread it out more equitably, or whether he increases it so that all values go down even more. It seems to me like, we like folks need a larger commitment from the mayor, and then they might be amenable to this, to setting the tax rate at the mayor's requested rate. That being said, you guys have a great evening, and I appreciate your hard work.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay, so we're just gonna go down the line with the four of us. We know where Patrick stands. So it's a yes, it's a no with the mayor's recommendation, and then we'll leave it at that. So do I have to make a motion?
Tracy, are you gonna make a motion to accept, to propose the rate that you just indicated shortly ago? Because I personally, I'd be inclined to go with that as well.
Sure, I can make a motion to accept the residential tax rate of $18.77 for the residential and $39.20.
Point of clarification, Counselor, it's actually
Yeah.
going to be tax factor.
Tax
So
factor,
it's-
I'm sorry.
In this case, what you're referring to would be
Oh, is the 7906?
7906.
Okay, so I make a motion that we do not go with the mayor's recommendation and we accept a tax factor of 7906, which will put the residential rate at 1877 and the commercial rate at 39.20.
I second it.
And now we can vote.
Yep.
So yes, for me, yes, Freddie, no, Nancy, Patrick.
Yes.
No, Patrick?
Yes,
No,
Richard.
Patrick, and yes, Richard. So that's the rate that we will propose to the council.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.
I agree with Counselor Hurst. There's a lot of good information this year. So I certainly appreciate everyone's time and effort into this committee. And I'm hoping to set a meeting up for early next week. Hopefully Monday, maybe Monday evening, and we could do 3 dates. I have not talked to President Williams yet. So I certainly, if it happens, it needs to happen tomorrow. So hopefully we'll find out.
Okay, and I would just suggest that we get in the room with the mayor and have discussions about this so that we're not here with 2 meetings before the tax rate setting and we're doing this. I think that would be a better way to handle the situation instead of sending out a press release and putting us all under the gun. And then we didn't even have a discussion about it, because maybe if the mayor heard from the community on the impact that a $216 bill affects families, he may be inclined to do a little bit more, especially at times when we have the funding to do so. So I just want to thank everybody for joining, and we'll see you at the next city council meeting. Thank you for the committee, and all your feedback is well taken. And thank you for taking your time to do this. Definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I've learned a lot. Thank you. I think
Thank
I've learned a lot anyway.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Good night.